My greedy mother-in-law demanded a 50% share of my $10 million restaurant for her younger son. I refused because he was a college dropout with a reckless nature and a habit of wasting money. Enraged, they conspired to burn down my restaurant. However, when they returned home, a shocking surprise awaited them, something they never anticipated. My name is Sophia Anderson, and I built my dream with my own hands. My restaurant, Sophia's Delight, wasn't just a business. It was my heart, my passion, and the culmination of years of hard work. Located in the bustling heart of Chicago, it stood as a beacon of comfort food, laughter, and celebration. I loved every moment of running it, early mornings, late nights, and everything in between. But life has a way of testing you, doesn't it? Success can bring out the best in some people and the worst in others. Looking back, I should have seen the signs, the cracks in the foundation of my relationships. But I didn't. I was 30 years old, married to Michael Anderson, a kind and steady man, or so I thought. Michael was an IT consultant, a calm and logical person who initially supported my dreams. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But perfection is just a mask, isn't it? Beneath the surface, there were things I didn't want to see. And then there was Margaret Anderson, my mother-in-law. She was 60, sharp-tongued, and carried an air of authority wherever she went. Margaret was old-fashioned, the kind of woman who believed a wife's job was to serve her husband and family. She resented my independence and success. I often caught her sneering when people complimented me on my restaurant, as if my achievements were a personal affront to her. Margaret's other son, Ryan, was her pride and joy, or maybe her biggest project. He was 28, a college dropout who always seemed to be chasing one failed venture after another. He was charming in a reckless sort of way, but had a knack for finding trouble. Margaret adored him, always making excuses for his shortcomings. I knew she wanted him to have more, but I never imagined how far she would go to make it happen. When Sophia's Delight began thriving, Margaret's attitude shifted from quiet disdain to outright hostility. It started with little remarks. "You spend more time in that restaurant than with your husband," she'd say with a pointed look. "Do you even cook at home anymore?" I brushed it off at first. Michael told me not to let it bother me. "That's just how she is," he'd say. And maybe he was right. But the comments kept coming, each one a jab aimed at making me feel less than I was. Then one evening, during a family dinner at our house, Margaret dropped her first bombshell. She sat at the table, her wine glass in hand, and announced, "Sophia, I've been thinking. You've built something wonderful with that restaurant. But it's time to think about the family." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, smiling sweetly, "Ryan's been struggling to find his footing. If you gave him a stake in the restaurant, say 50%, he could finally have a solid future. He'd make a great partner." I was stunned. 50%? Half of everything I'd built from scratch? I glanced at Michael, expecting him to step in, but he stayed silent, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Margaret," I said as calmly as I could, "I appreciate your concern for Ryan, but Sophia's Delight is my business. I can't just hand over half of it." Her smile faded, replaced by a hard, icy glare. "Family comes first, Sophia. You wouldn't even have that restaurant if it weren't for Michael's support." Her words cut deep, but I refused to back down. Michael supported me because he loves me, and I worked every day to make that restaurant what it is. Ryan's welcome to work hard and create something of his own. The tension at the table was unbearable. Ryan sat there smirking, as if this was some game to him. Margaret, however, was furious. I knew I'd crossed a line, but I wasn't about to compromise my principles. After that night, Margaret's hostility became more open. She stopped visiting the restaurant and made snide comments about me at every family gathering. Michael tried to mediate, but his attempts felt half-hearted. "She's just set in her ways," he'd say. "Give her time." But time only made things worse. Ryan started dropping by the restaurant uninvited, offering advice on how to run it better. I knew he was acting on Margaret's orders, testing the waters for another attempt to claim a share. I ignored him, focusing instead on expanding the menu, renovating the dining area, and training my staff. Still, the strain was getting to me. I could feel it in my marriage. Michael and I argued more often. He began to echo Margaret's sentiments, telling me I was too focused on my career and not enough on the family. The love and partnership we once had started to feel like a distant memory. One afternoon, Margaret came to the restaurant unannounced. She walked in, her face a mask of false sweetness, and sat at a corner table. I reluctantly joined her. "Sophia," she began, "I don't know why you're being so difficult. Ryan needs this. We're family." I folded my arms. "And I've told you, Margaret, this isn't about being difficult. This is about what's fair. I built this business. I won't give it away." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off, but deep down I knew Margaret wasn't someone who took no for an answer. As I watched her leave that day, I couldn't help but feel that something was coming. Something I wasn't prepared for. And I was right. I should have trusted my instincts that day when Margaret left the restaurant with that chilling warning. There was something in her eyes, a mix of anger and determination, that unsettled me. But I had so much on my plate that I brushed it aside, convincing myself that her words were just empty threats. I should have known better. Margaret was not someone who made idle threats. Life moved on, or at least it seemed to. I threw myself into my work at Sophia's Delight, using the restaurant as both my sanctuary and my purpose. Despite the tension at home, I believed that if I worked hard enough, things would get better. But I was wrong. The storm was brewing, and it was about to hit me in ways I never imagined. The fire happened on a quiet Tuesday night, just after closing. I was at home, exhausted for a long day, when my phone rang. It was my head chef, Julia, her voice frantic. "Sophia, the restaurant, it's on fire." My heart stopped.
"What?"
"Are you sure?"
"Yes."
"The fire department's already there, but it looks bad. You need to come right away." I don't even remember how I got there. The drive was a blur, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. When I arrived, I was met with chaos, fire trucks, flashing lights, and smoke billowing into the night sky. My restaurant, my dream, was engulfed in flames. I stood there, frozen, as firefighters worked tirelessly to control the blaze. Julia ran up to me, her face streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," she said. "I don't know how this happened, neither did I." All I knew was that the sight of Sophia's Delight burning felt like a dagger to my chest. It was as if everything I had worked for was being ripped away from me. The next few days were a whirlwind of devastation and confusion. The fire department conducted an investigation and confirmed what I had feared. It wasn't an accident. The fire had been deliberately set. Arson. The word alone made my stomach turn. Who would do such a thing? Why would anyone want to destroy something so precious to me? My mind raced with possibilities, but nothing made sense until I remembered Margaret's parting words. "You'll regret this." I didn't want to believe it, but a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind whispered that she was capable of it. Still, I needed proof. I couldn't let suspicion turn into accusation without evidence. As the investigation unfolded, I found myself haunted by anxiety and anger. Michael was no comfort. He tried to be supportive at first, but his patience wore thin as I became consumed by the search for answers. "Maybe you should just focus on rebuilding," he said one night as we sat in the living room. "Rebuilding?" I snapped. "Michael, someone burned down my restaurant. Don't you want to know who did it?" "Of course I do, but what good does obsessing over do? The insurance will cover the damages. Let it go, Sophia." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Let it go? How could he be so dismissive? This wasn't just about the money. This was about betrayal, about someone deliberately trying to destroy my life. That conversation planted a seed of doubt in my mind about Michael. I began to wonder if he truly understood me anymore, or if he ever really had. Then came the breakthrough. The restaurant's security cameras had survived the fire, and the footage was recoverable. I couldn't describe the mix of fear and determination I felt as I sat in front of the laptop, watching the recordings with the investigator. And there it was, the truth laid bare in black and white. The footage showed Margaret and Ryan sneaking into the restaurant late at night. They carried cans of gasoline, their movements swift and deliberate. Margaret, with her usual composure, directed Ryan as he poured the fuel around the dining area. Then, with a flick of a lighter, they set my dreams ablaze. I felt sick. My hands shook as I watched the flames roar to life on the screen. My own mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, they had done this to me. Armed with the evidence, I went to the police. Margaret and Ryan were arrested shortly after, their faces plastered across local news stations. The community was shocked. How could a mother and son stoop so low? But what hurt me the most was Michael's reaction. He wasn't angry at his mother or brother. Instead, he was angry at me. "This is what happens when you push people away," he said, his voice cold. "You've been so focused on that restaurant that you've forgotten about the family. If you had just listened to her." I couldn't let him finish. "Are you serious, Michael? You're blaming me for this? They burned down my restaurant. Your mother and brother committed a crime, and you're saying it's my fault." "I'm saying it didn't have to come to this," he shot back. "You could have handled things differently." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I thought I could rely on, the man I loved, was defending them. It felt like another betrayal, one I wasn't prepared for. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything in my mind. The fire, the betrayal, Michael's words, it was all too much. I realized then that something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about Margaret or Ryan. This was about Michael too. He wasn't the man I thought he was, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. The fire had destroyed more than my restaurant. It had destroyed the foundation of my marriage. And deep down, I knew what I had to do. I never thought I'd reach a point where I'd question my entire marriage. Michael had been my rock, my partner, and the one person I thought I could lean on when the world turned against me. But the fire changed everything. It didn't just destroy Sophia's delight. It exposed cracks in my relationship that I could no longer ignore. After Margaret and Ryan's arrest, the days that followed were suffocating. I couldn't escape the whispers of betrayal or the judgmental stares from people in our community. But the worst part wasn't the external scrutiny. It was the cold, growing distance between Michael and me. At first, I thought he was in shock. After all, it couldn't have been easy for him to process the fact that his mother and brother were responsible for something so heinous. I tried to give him space, hoping he'd come around. But the more I tried, the more he withdrew. One evening, I decided to confront him directly. It was late, and we were sitting in the living room. The silence between us was unbearable. "Michael," I began cautiously, "we need to talk." He glanced at me, his expression weary. "About what?" "About us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About what happened." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Sophia, I don't know what you want me to say. It's a mess, okay? I know that." "A mess?" I repeated, incredulous. "Your mother and brother burned down my restaurant, Michael. They destroyed everything I worked for. And instead of being angry at them, you're blaming me?" "I'm not blaming you," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I just think this whole thing could have been avoided. If you'd been more flexible, maybe they wouldn't have felt pushed to do something so drastic." The words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Flexible? You think I should have just handed over half of my restaurant? The restaurant I built from nothing? To Ryan, of all people. "Their family, Sophia," he said, his voice rising. "Maybe it wasn't fair, but sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the people you care about." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "So that's it? You think I should have let them walk all over me? That it's my fault they committed a crime?" "I didn't say it's your fault," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. I don't know, Sophia. This whole situation is tearing us apart." And there it was. The truth. Michael wasn't angry at his mother and brother because, deep down, he thought I was to blame. Maybe he didn't say it outright, but his actions, his words, and his indifference all pointed to the same conclusion. He didn't see me as his equal. He saw me as an obstacle in the way of his family's unity. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. But beneath it all was a growing clarity. This wasn't just about the fire or Margaret's schemes. This was about Michael's inability to stand by me when I needed him the most. I realized then that I couldn't continue like this. The fire had already destroyed my restaurant. I wouldn't let it destroy me too. The next morning, I made my decision. I sat down at the kitchen table and waited for Michael to join me. When he did, I took a deep breath and spoke the words I never thought I'd say. "I want a divorce." Michael froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What?" he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me or support me. You chose your family over me, Michael. And I can't live with that." He set the cup down, his face a mixture of shock and anger. "You're seriously doing this? After everything we've been through?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "Because I deserve better. I deserve someone who believes in me, who stands by me when things get tough. And that's not you." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Filing for divorce felt like closing the door on a chapter one wasn't ready to let go of, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Michael begged me to reconsider at first, but his pleas were half-hearted, as if even he knew this was inevitable. Through it all, I clung to one thought: I had survived the fire, and I would survive this too. Margaret and Ryan had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. I wasn't about to let their actions define me or my future. I started making plans to rebuild Sophia's Delight. The insurance payout would cover some of the costs, but I knew it would take more than money to bring my dream back to life. It would take resilience, determination, and an unshakable belief in myself. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was ready for the challenge. The fire might have taken my restaurant, and Michael's betrayal might have taken my trust, but neither could take my spirit. I was stronger than that. I was stronger than them. The days after my divorce felt like walking through rubble. Everything I thought I'd built, my marriage, my place in Michael's family, and even the walls of Sophia's Delight, had been reduced to ashes. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can rebuild. You have to. It wasn't easy. The insurance payout gave me a start, but the real challenge was finding the strength to begin again. Standing in the charred remains of my restaurant, I felt both grief and determination. The memories of what had been lost hurt, but they also reminded me of what I was capable of creating. I started small. The first step was clearing the debris, brick by brick, a symbolic gesture that felt like therapy. The old space wasn't salvageable, so I decided to relocate. A charming corner property became the new home of Sophia's Delight. It was a risk, but I had no choice but to take it. I was blessed to have people who believed in me. My head chef, Julia, was one of them. "You're stronger than this, Sophia," she told me. "And I'll be here every step of the way." Her words fueled me. Slowly, I rebuilt my team and worked tirelessly to bring my vision to life. I threw myself into every detail, choosing new furniture, redesigning the menu, and rebranding the restaurant. This wasn't just about reopening, it was about proving to myself that I could rise above everything that had been done to me. Meanwhile, news of Margaret and Ryan's arrest spread quickly. Their trial became a public spectacle, and I attended every court date, not for vengeance, but for closure. Watching them face the consequences of their actions was both painful and validating. Margaret, once so smug and self-assured, looked like a shadow of herself. Ryan, too, avoided my gaze, his charm replaced by shame. The court's ruling was swift. Both were convicted of arson and sentenced to prison. As the verdict was read, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and even a twinge of pity. But most of all, I felt free. The reopening of Sophia's Delight was nothing short of magical. The new space felt fresh, vibrant, and alive. On opening night, the dining room was packed with loyal customers and new faces alike. The support from the community was overwhelming. Many people had followed my story and admired my resilience. I realized then that I hadn't just rebuilt a restaurant. I'd rebuilt myself. Michael didn't show up that night, and I didn't expect him to. We hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized. I heard he'd moved out of Chicago, unable to face the fallout of his family's actions. A part of me wished him well, but another part knew I was better off without him. As I stood in the middle of the bustling dining room, watching happy customers enjoy the fruits of my labor, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Yes, I had been betrayed by Margaret, Ryan, and even Michael in his own way. But their betrayal didn't define me.
My resilience did.
This is my story, one of fire and ashes, of heartbreak and healing, and of strength and triumph. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no matter how much the world tries to break you, you can always rise again. Stronger, wiser, and unstoppable.